Nobody.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where people are. It is so nice to have so many people on this chat. Um, I am Wendy Rockwell. I am speaking from Costa Rica, president of the International Union for Land Value Taxation. I just want to welcome everyone to a talk by Heather Wetzel, A Place to Live.
Is
Barriers.
he the features speaker, the one we know?
Wetzel.
Everybody mute themselves, please mute.
If we can mute so we can hear each other better.
Yeah, she is. She's the chair of the.
The one who came to our house.
Okay, Tom, can you mute, please? Can you mute?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
I can find my.
And we will have time later for questions.
Okay, I'm gonna mute all.
And conversation. Yeah, so if everyone can mute.
I can't hear anybody. I can't hear you, Wendy.
Okay, I'm fixing that.
Right, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I was muted. I'm not muted anymore.
No, I've unmuted me.
Okay.
Okay, Wendy,
Yes.
take it away again.
Okay, so A Place to Live. Barriers to affordable housing in the United Kingdom and worldwide presenter Heather Wetzel. She is chair of the UK Labour Land Campaign. Heather Wetzel will discuss the primary reasons why housing has become out of reach to rent or buy for so many. She will share her concerns about our increasingly divided society of rich and poor and consequent social and economic problems. Heather will put forward fundamental policy proposals that can solve the problem. She will discuss how these policies can, at the same time, address environmental challenges. This is sponsored by the International Union for Land Value Taxation. And I would like to invite everyone to our website, www.theiu.org, and sign up for our newsletter. And then you will receive the notifications of these conversations that we're having, for whichever one is welcome, and invite your neighbors and friends. This is also co-sponsored by the Council of Georgist Organizations, Robert Schockenbach Foundation, Earth Rights Institute, Center for the Study of Economics, Public Revenue Education Council, the Better Cities Committee, School of Cooperative Individualism, Confed, and Lay Society. Heather Wetzel is based in the UK and has a BA honors degree in economics. She is a member of the UK Labour Party and is chair of the Labour Land Campaign, a UK organization that includes members of the Labour Party, Green Party, trade unions, and others who believe in social and economic equality, fairness, and sharing of our natural resource wealth. Heather prefers the public ownership of our natural resources and the charging of economic rent for their use. She recognizes that a land value tax is a positive step for achieving a shift in taxation off earned incomes and on to the unearned incomes currently pocketed by owners of land and other natural resources. From 1978 to 1990, Heather was an elected councillor for a West London borough population over 200,000, sorry. Between 1987 and 1990, she served as chair of education with responsibility for over 80 schools. She is researcher for the Labour Land Campaign and other organizations. Heather lobbies members of parliament and other public officials on the economic and social benefits of implementing an annual land value tax. Heather is author of Welfare for the Rich, a booklet that shows how the inequitable US tax system means the poorest of the poor are subsidizing the richest of the rich. who are getting the greatest amount of subsidy, not just by avoiding or evading paying taxes, but also because the UK government and European Union subsidizes and grants capitalize into land value. So welcome, Heather.
Okay. Well, it's nice that all of you have joined. I recognise most of the names so far that I've seen, and I hope we have an interesting discussion later on. I don't think this is a subject that's just peculiar to the UK. It's a worldwide problem where people are not able to afford to rent or buy a home. In the UK, certainly, we've got more and more adults in their 20s, 30s, even 40s are living with family because they cannot afford to rent or buy. And I did some rough calculations, and something like over 50% of adults in the UK are not actually home owners because they're living with family or are tenants, private and public sector. So, and more families are forced to, that's the next one, Lana. Next slide, right. Next slide. Oh, yeah. More and more families are living in slum homes. They're paying high rents to bad landlords. They're not the majority, but there's a substantial number of people living in very bad conditions who also have children. And of course, children of renters don't inherit their parents' home or get loans from parents or grandparents and can't get on what's commonly called the property ladder here in England. We also have the situation where so many homes are bought up by buy-to-let landlords. They become landlords to tenants, and second homes, particularly in countryside, places of beauty and where tourists visit, seaside, etc. And many of those are bought up also by speculators. And in our cities, we have blocks of flats that are empty most of the year because the landlords maybe live in this country, maybe live abroad, but they haven't bought them these blocks of, or haven't bought the flats as homes. They've bought them for speculative purposes. They're not interested in them being homes. So these flats are left empty alongside areas where we have people living in squalor who are homeless or living in very short-term property in quite unsatisfactory conditions. Also in the UK, we have many building sites that have planning permission for homes and for commercial properties to, they're left undeveloped. Where I lived in West London, a place called Brentford, which is quite a prosperous area, up and coming, prices are rising because people who can't afford to live in sort of central London move out, and that lot moves out, and people moving out to Brentford, and it's on the River Thames, and there's a lot of development going on there. But I lived opposite two sites, huge building sites with permission for thousands of homes, hotels, offices, etc. And they were left empty for something like 25 years. One's been developed, the other one's been mostly developed, but it's still got an ugly, empty office block on it that the developers still want to, they want to change the planning permission for it. So people have still got that eyesore. And these sites, of course, become public toilets, rubbish tips, etc., etc. Quite unsatisfactory. And the root cause there, of course, is land speculation. People wanting something for nothing. The next slide, please. In the UK, we have two main property taxes. One on residential properties, which is the council tax, and commercial one is business rates. And the council tax is, homes are valued at, I forget the price, or 1991 prices. So they're well out of date, certainly in places like London and around there. And they're put into 6 bands. So the properties are put at those valuations. I'm not sure how many homes there are that are £40,000 in the UK, but probably in some very poor areas where there's low investment, you can probably pick up a flat for that sort of money. And of course, going down to the more expensive homes, 320,000 is not a fortune. I live in a modest terrace home, and it's over $500,000. So band H goes up to homes worth up to 320,000. Of course, when you're above that, you're talking about millions of pounds in a home, and that is capped at that valuation. So that's a real big flaw in that system. Next one, please, Alana. So there's the council tax, and I put a couple of examples in there. We also have the UK stamp duty land tax, and it's not a land tax, it's actually a sales tax. It's on transaction when properties over £500,000 in value have been sold, then they pay a stamp duty land tax. And similarly, there's one that's in England, and similarly in Northern Ireland and in Scotland and in Wales. That tax has actually been suspended during the COVID crisis. And what we've seen is an increase in prices of homes because people are trying to buy their new home at what they see as the lower price because of this pause in the stamp duty land tax. But in fact, it's actually added to house prices. So we're actually seeing the situation where people are losing jobs or on furlough, so are only getting 80% of their wages, but the number of homes being sold has increased and the prices of homes have been going up. And of course, any subsidy, I'll mention this later on, any subsidy or grant will always capitalise into land value. So that's effectively what's happened there with this holiday on the stamp duty land tax. We have more and more low-income earners that are forced to call themselves self-employed, and we've had a recent case here with Uber where people are actually employed, but it saves the employers paying national insurance, employers' national insurance. And we have a lot of people underemployed and unemployed. We have empty commercial properties or underused commercial properties, not accessible to people with skills and talents and able to produce goods locally. And that is a big problem, I think, all over, where people are not able to access sites, either to live in as a home or commercial premises to be a business person or to expand an existing business because they cannot afford to pay the bills. Now, the next slide, please. This is actually, I think this is out of line, but it's the example of the two cities' council tax bills I used. Westminster, I need the next line, Alana. That's it, thanks. And Westminster is a borough in central London, and it's got some very high-priced properties, a lot of commerce, Parliament cited there, etc. And another area is the city of Newcastle in northeast England, where there are quite a lot of low incomes, and there's certainly a high need for local public services. And those are the bands, and that's what each council charges homeowners or tenants, because they pay it indirectly. That's the charge, the council tax bill for those areas. And you look at Westminster, so band A is only 520, whereas in Newcastle, they're paying considerably more, and yet they've got much greater need, and it goes down to band H. So a house worth 20, 30, 40 million, or even lower prices in the millions, will pay 1,500 a year, whereas in Newcastle, they'll be paying nearly 4,000 a year in their council tax bill. Totally wrong, totally unfair. And again, it's helping better off. The next slide, please. We have this situation because people can't afford to live in not just London, but in the big cities around the country, because property prices are too expensive to rent or buy, and so therefore they commute. One example that's given regularly by Dave Wetzel is bus drivers in London. They'll live on the outskirts, they'll travel by car for a couple of hours into London, do their 8 hours driving a bus with the passengers on it, and then another 2 hours going home. And that's terrible that people are driving to do their driving job and then driving home. And of course, that is dangerous at all levels. It causes more pollution. it causes we have more road deaths, road accidents, and the ongoing effects of that on the families and on our local communities. So let's look at the underlying causes of the problems. And of course, the major one is we have land monopoly ownership. I forget the ratio, but a huge chunk of our land is owned by few landowners, including the wealthiest land. And land speculation, of course, pushes up prices. I found this, it's the Henry George quote, everyone works but the vacant lot. And I think that was quite interesting, and it's so appropriate today, and I think it's appropriate around the world. And I like the final bit, I take the profit without earning it, but for the remedy, read Henry George. And of course, we have landowners who are in our Parliament and our House of Lords, and the origin of Parliament was set up, you had to be a landowner to be able to take part in Parliament. And of course, the House of Lords was originally landowners. There's been some changes, but there's a lot of people who own land, swathes of land, but also maybe they'll own 1 or 2 flats that they rent out. So those people are making decisions about our tax system when they have a vested interest, and they don't have to declare that in any discussions in Parliament. They don't have to declare that vested interest. I believe biggest problem, certainly here, and from my experience of speaking to people in America, is that most economists and politicians have either forgotten or deliberately ignore the law of economic rent. And we have to remember there are 3 factors of production: labor, capital, and land, and that includes all natural resources. And the return to labor is wages, to capital is interest or profit, and the return to land is rent. Economic rent is the economic turn, and that's the excess income left after the cost of labor and capital have been met. Now, that has been deliberately left out of economic theory, out of economic teaching. And you mentioned I got a degree in economics. When I was in my 30s, I wanted a job, and in Britain, you suddenly had to have a degree. I've never used my degree in my jobs, and I didn't think I needed it, but it's this thing that you have to have a degree. So I got a degree, and I could get a better paid job. My girls were growing up, and I wanted a job. But so I did economics, but the section on the rent of land lasted something like 10 minutes, and they said the rent of land is a site with its next best use, and that change is the economic rent. So they weren't going down to the base, the full economic rent of land. And then they said what we'll do is lump land in with capital, so land has disappeared off the scene. And unfortunately, people who are making decisions or influencing decision makers do not understand the law of rent, and that is a real problem. Another forgotten or ignored economic law is that land values and taxes are inversely related, and that's very relevant because if you reduce taxes, then you increase land values, and again, it's another gift to landowners. And similarly, subsidies and grants will capitalize into land value, and we certainly have some good examples here at the moment coming out of Brexit. Our farmers have been receiving the Common Agricultural Policy subsidies from the EU, and the government is having to look for a replacement. And they're talking about making it based on environment rather than the size of farm sizes based on that, and looking much more for environmental improvements, which in my opinion, farmers should be doing anyway, a good farmer, but at least it's looking at something more positive than just a straight gift to the big landowners. If you own a small holding of a few acres, you don't qualify for the grant. And years ago, we used to have the Butter Mountains and the Wine Lakes, because that subsidy was given on production. So the more you produce, the more grant you got. And we had overproduction and terrible waste of food, but that did get changed. But it's still ended up in the pockets of landowners. An example there is a farmer I know up in Scotland. Many of you will know him, Duncan Pickard, and he owns his farm, but he also rents land from a farmer next door who's retired. And for that farmer, Duncan's rent to that farmer is the subsidies plus a small sum of money in relation to the value of the farm. And also Duncan has one of his sons rents a farm. He's a tenant farmer separate from Duncan, and his whole rent is the subsidies. So taxpayers all over the UK are paying their rents, and Duncan recognises that and sees the whole system is wrong. And as a result, farming is not as efficiently done as it could be or should be, and certainly on the environmental aspect. Our tax system distorts the economy, very much to the advantage of landowners. And we have rich and poor in regions and in individuals, and even in places like Westminster, you'll find areas where poor people live. And it's terribly wrong and it's terribly unfair, because our taxes are avoided and evaded by many. But with our system, if you're employed, your taxes are automatically deducted out of your pay and by your employer. We have national insurance tax, income tax that employees pay, and then the employers also pay a national insurance contribution on top as an employer. But when those taxes can be avoided, and they certainly are, then that skews the whole economy. And again, we have the poorest of folk subsidising the better off. We used to have, when I was on the council, from 78 to 90, we used to take pride in Hounslow and the number of council homes that we used to build. We had very successful, nice homes built to a good standard, good sizes, good quality building. And also we had flats, and we were able to rent out the higher flats in the blocks to people who didn't have children. We had a policy that no children living above the 4th floor, because if you're stuck in a flat and you've got kids, particularly young kids, it's a problem if you let them out to play, or you've got to go out with them. So it's not fair, not right, having families, young families, living in high rise. But of course, Margaret Thatcher came along with her right to buy, where people had the right to buy. Sorry, Alana, it's the next slide. People had the right to buy their council home at very subsidised level. So and then they used to put in an appeal against the valuation, and it got even more reduced. And today, over 40% of what were council homes that are now owned by private landlords are being rented back to local authorities for the council to pay, or renting out to private tenants. And if you're in a private former council house, you pay 2-3 times more than a neighbour who's paying as a council tenant. So there's huge inequality there. And those homes have been lost to people who need, who are on lower incomes, to rent a home. And there's huge problems, lots of discussion over here about how we need more public sector housing. But of course, we want decent sized housing. We want good quality housing. On our private developments, we ask for planning gain, and usually there should be a proportion of properties that are affordable rent, which generally isn't affordable because it's a percentage of the market rent. And of course, when you're in places like London, rents are so high, that percentage is just still out of people's reach. But there's terrible things like they're built in poorer quality. There'll be a little play area for kids of the people who are buying the flats, and kids from these affordable rented properties who are generally council tenants, they're not able, their kids are not allowed to play in the parks. They'll have separate entrances. So there's some horrible stories. And also more and more, the developers will plead poverty and give all sorts of reasons why they can't include the affordable homes in their new developments. Pleading poverty, these poor people. Anyway, so what we say, going on to solutions, we say that council tax is regressive and it's time we scrapped it. It's inefficient, it's bad, it's done on bad valuations. I'm getting myself mixed up here, sorry. So when we look at the solutions, the first thing is we need economists, politicians and other decision makers who understand the relevance of land ownership and land wealth in the economy, and who recognize that a home has two values. There's the building value, and we shouldn't penalize people if they have a nice building or if they add a bedroom on or improve it. And there's the land or location value. And certainly we have television program, location, which really draws attention to the different prices of the same type of home, different locations, and the value is different. And that's purely land value. But it's seen as a bunce here if your house goes up in value, forgetting that the neighbour next door, their rent goes up if property prices rise. Building costs and the cost of buildings are similar all over the UK, and similarly in other countries, but land values are not. And we need to remember that land value arises from our combined demand for its use, whether it's for home, for business, for leisure. It's not from owning land. Landowners do not create land value. And for me, I'm a socialist, I'm not apologizing for that. But from my perspective, on the left of the spectrum, if all land was held in common with the full economic rent levied on each side, we wouldn't have land hoarding like we have in the UK, or land speculation. And currently unused or underused buildings be brought into use, and those horrible idle development sites that have got planning permission for homes and jobs would be brought into full use. So for here in the UK, we have discussions, and given that common ownership of land and all other natural resources, which I favour, is not a reality, certainly in the UK in the near future, a shift in taxes off of earned incomes and buildings and onto unearned incomes that landowners currently enjoy, that would see huge benefits for all. I said about council tax is regressive, and we need to replace it. Labour Land Campaign, we have discussions on whether it should be included in land value tax or if there's other ways that we can do it, because a couple of elections ago in 2017, the Labour manifesto was looking at replacing property taxes, business rates, council tax with a land value tax. Our current president is John McDonnell, and he was shadow chancellor at the time, and he has somewhat hooked on to understanding the relevance of land in the economy. But of course, the Times and the right-wing media called it a garden tax, and they want to nick your garden value to scare people. But even the Times, about 6 months ago, there was an article in the Times on the benefits of shifting to a land value tax. So even they are starting to think about things. We have, there's a campaign called the proportional property tax. It's a fairer taxation of homes. It's done on a straight valuation of the total value of a home. I don't like it because it includes the building, but if it's a step forward and it's looking at total value, which obviously includes, and there's no cap on it, so that would collect a lot of land value. The stamp duty land value tax, as I said, it's not a land tax, it's a transaction tax, and that is not a good tax. It's another regressive one, and it only looks at the value of the sale at the time of sale. So homes that don't change hands, they don't pay it. So LVT is an annual levy charged on the annual rental value of each site. And each site has to be valued according to its optimum permitted use. Our planning system here getting planning permission certainly needs a lot of changes and a lot of benefits, but you can't just have a free-for-all building in the UK. But so we've got the skills of valuing land in all of its states with whatever's on top. And we certainly have those skills, and we have a lot of information on our property taxes, council tax, business rates, and of course in the farming sector on those that claim the CAP subsidy. So we've got a lot of data there that could be used. And it would stop this land hoarding and land being kept out of use, and which makes homes so unaffordable for many. Where we don't need offices because of changes in IT, etc., they could be converted from offices to homes. But of course, what's happening is that there are some areas where that can happen, but without any planning permission. So they're converting offices into very small flats with very small size rooms. So there's no quality there for people to live in. But because commercial premises will become more affordable with a full land value tax, we'd see new business startups, and we'd see people, I think we go on to the next one here, Alana. People setting up new businesses as individuals, cooperatives, or companies, or expanding on businesses, and wages would start to rise. And in those areas that are currently very low income areas and don't have investment that they need, over time, then the land values would rise and there'd be more income for providing local services. So the opportunity to produce more goods and food locally would benefit our environment. We wouldn't have lorries carrying goods from one place to another place to be changed or repackaged and transported again on roads. We'd have reduction in road accidents, reduction in pollution, and reduction in noise. And land would be used more efficiently and sparingly. And that is so much what we need. We have to think about the economy. We have to think about the social and economic benefits, as well as the environmental benefits that would come about because of an annual land value tax, and making people who own land use it more efficiently for whatever purpose, farming or for buildings. And we would all benefit from that. We would take inflation out, so the inflated prices of properties would reduce, and we would be looking at much better economy with less distortion, less poverty, less north-south divide that we certainly experience in this country, the rich and poor. We want social, economic and environmental changes that benefit everybody, and a land value tax will certainly help that, and will certainly will support and underpin good housing policies and business. So I leave it at that, and I look forward to the discussions that take place. Thank you. I can't, oh.
Hey. Heather, I'm going to look at our chat now to see if questions came in and go to those first. But could you meanwhile talk about the movement for land value tax in the UK a little bit? And also in your slides, you're talking about the importance of a more local based economy.
Yeah.
And you recently did a presentation with George Monbiot. He's talking about the 15-minute city. Maybe you could describe that concept and how it relates to land value tax and what the conversation is there a little bit, please.
Right, well, I'm certainly no expert on that, but certainly anything that increases local production of goods and stops the transporting around, whether it's food or other goods, has got to be good for the environment. And on a worldwide basis, in the UK, we've certainly exported so many jobs and our businesses and along with it, our pollution, of course, we've exported to places like China and India, as of so many countries. And the cost to the environment is terrible. So I'm not a little Englander by any means, but we need to, as a world economy, we need to produce more efficiently. Maybe you should invite George Monbiot to a future meeting, because he is absolutely brilliant on environmental things, and certainly on land and land value tax. And people like him, he writes in The Guardian and other things, and he there's an increasing awareness of land value. So it's across the board. And I always say it's not a left-right issue, it's a right-wrong issue. So in Parliament, we have an all-party parliamentary group on land value capture. And that's because it's an all-party group, it has to have members from certainly the major parties. So you've got Conservatives in there, Liberals, Green Party, Labour Party. I'm not sure there's any Scottish National Party in there, or the Welsh Nationalist. But in Wales, their First Minister talks about land value tax. Carol Wilcox, our Secretary, and I have met with him. And it's so encouraging when you meet with politicians and they're actually interested and even know what you're talking about. So there's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, certainly in terms of reforming our business rates and council tax, and looking at our tax system, which is quite hideous. And I was saying about the Common Agricultural Policy subsidies, I was on a meeting this week with our Labour Party shadow Environment Secretary, and Luke Pollard and another of his colleagues, Daniel Zeichner, and they're looking at what the Labour Party policy should be on replacing these Common Agricultural Policy subsidies. So again, there's an interest of what we're talking about. And I'm hoping that's a worldwide interest and awareness of land, the relevance of land in the economy.
Okay, I see the chat here. I just want to mention a chat entry that Enid Pinch and Sandra Dutson have come from Manchester, Warrington area Quaker Meeting Social Justice Group. So Wendy, I'd be happy to hear about that. We've been wanting to contact Quakers in the UK. So from Ed Dotson, Heather, I've researched the impact that Joseph Fels had in the UK during the early years of the century. He funded the organization of a number of labor communities that brought in unemployed people to live on these farms. Do you know what happened to them?
I don't know. I don't know the project that you're talking about.
Okay, something for
We'll have
future
to, I mean, if you can
consideration.
say something on that here, or
Ed, do you want to talk a little
I'm
bit
interested.
about that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ed.
Well, do you know who Joseph Fels was? Is that name? Well,
Not to
Fels
me.
Fels was a very strong supporter of Henry George, and he was a manufacturer. And in the late 1890s, he moved to the UK to promote land value taxation. And what he did was, during the times of extreme poverty, remember there was a depression in the 1905, 1907 period. And so he helped to fund the acquisition of a lot of land outside of London and elsewhere. And he formed these labor communities where he brought in unemployed artisans and people, and they basically built their own communities on this land. I believe it was all held as a community land trust, but I haven't been able to find anything substantive that says what happened to them. Did they have a life? Were they eventually privatized? Are they still in existence? I can send you some specific information, but
Well, that sounds interesting. I don't know about that. I know there's different things all over where people try and set up projects and community land trusts, etc. I went to years ago. My sister lives in Scotland. Dave and I were up there visiting. We went right up the north coast there, and we found this little community I don't think it was based on land, but it was a cooperative, and all these artists living there cooperatively, and their cooperative housing. And it was really interesting. I've seen a few of those. Of course, land is very much an issue in Scotland, much more than in England. We've forgotten our land history in England very much, but Scotland and Wales certainly remember history of land ownership, land thefts, the enclosures that are still going on in our towns and cities, with developments taking over what was once public space being held by private developers. Few years back, the Occupy campaign outside St. Paul's Cathedral, that we went up and visited a few times, and people were camped out there. That now can't happen because all that area has been privatized by local, I suppose, the authority to local development that's gone on there, which is tragic.
Yeah, I have from Scott Baker now, Heather. What happens to the value of land when we are doing Zoom session like we are now, instead of congregating in center squares and offices?
Oh my goodness me, that's a good one, isn't it, Scott? I think you need to give the answer on that.
I think we all know the answer.
If land prices reduce, then that's a good thing. If we're not traveling long distances and polluting the atmosphere, the environment, that's a good thing. But of course, we also need, in our natural resource wealth, we need to capture the economic benefit of the spectrum and our use of the internet and that. And I don't think that happens anywhere near enough. And with these online businesses very much, as well as location, a land value tax, we also need to be looking at all aspects of the environment. But yes, it's to do with the land price versus the land spectrum. One of those questions, I think, it was at the beginning mentioned about how much LVT would raise if it's replacing other taxes. Did I read that right? I was trying to look through. Because taxes and land values are inversely related, whatever taxes you reduce will go into land value, and therefore a land value tax will replace existing taxes, but in much more efficiently. But the income would be, actually it would be greater, because those that currently avoid paying taxes will have to pay a land value tax. You can't hide your bit of land in the Cayman Islands, we always say. So because land values and taxes are inversely related, if you reduce one, the other goes up. And it's a tax that we call it land value tax, but it's actually not right, is it? It's a natural resource benefit and ground rent, economic rent, but because it's known as land value tax, we do use that term. And of course, it gives back to the community a share in the wealth that they all generate. We all create land value.
Okay. Hey, this is from Bill Batt. Lots of news articles and some recent studies have put tax reform on the burner this year. It seems that Rishi Sunak is open to changes. Is land value tax among the higher possibilities? And also, is revenue decentralization a prospect in the near future?
I don't think the revenue decentralization, I think, I really don't know about that. I mean, we had hopes with Rishi Sunak because there was talk about business rates being replaced with a land value tax, and that he might actually look at it in the budget that's just happened, or a future budget.
Could you say who he is? Most of his.
Oh, sorry, he's the Chancellor of, he's the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer. Okay. So he's in charge of all our taxes and that. And we've just had a budget statement in the UK. And it's such an opportunity it's an opportunity anytime, but with the coming out of the economic effects of the coronavirus, which has certainly impacted, I suppose, all economies. But here, with people on furlough and businesses closing and unemployment rising, and all the rest of it, it's such an opportunity. And I have quoted the San Francisco, how they got out of the terrible economic problems caused by the earthquake in, was it 1906? Because they actually said, you will pay a land value tax to the owners of land. And what happened was they used that income to redevelop the city, but also they improved things like more parks and social housing. So it's quite a story to tell. Out of such a disaster, it gives an opportunity for an economic way forward that everyone would benefit, as well as the environment. And I think, you know, I've written a couple of things and pushed that after the coronavirus, we keep talking about, do we want to go back to normal? Well, I say no, let's use it as an opportunity to change our tax base.
So Enid, can you give us an idea of the scale? Could a land value tax raise enough
Yes,
to
it would
face off
certainly.
income tax, council
Yeah.
tax, etc.?
Yes, it will more than replace, it will raise more than whatever it's replacing, because what's current, our business rates are avoided by businesses or by property owners who leave their premises empty. They don't have to pay business rates. These development sites, they don't pay any property tax, they don't pay a land tax. And so therefore there's all that lost income leaving the bill to be shared by amongst those who do pay their business rates or their council tax in terms of property taxes. So it more than, and it's this inverse relationship between land values and taxation that we have to remember. As you reduce one, you increase the other. So it'll more than pay for replacing current taxes, as well as all the other benefits. It's more efficient, make us use land more efficiently, and currently poorer areas, of course, there'll be more investment in those areas.
Okay, in the chat, there was a link, a wiki link to Joseph Fells and a comment about Fells, if
That's
you all
good.
want to look at it. Now from Mark Verville, could you outline what implementation would look like, and how would pensions in their long-held homes, how would pensioners in their long-held homes be impacted? So implementation and pensioners.
Right. All land, assuming a future government wherever, they'll have it on all land. Whatever land is going to come under the remit of land value tax, shift to land. So all land, first of all, it needs to be registered, and then it will be valued at its current permitted use value. So for instance, if we have a plot of land quite near here, near Heathrow Airport, there's an urban farm. Now that site as an urban farm has got a very low value. If it was going to be a hotel because it's near the airport, it would have a totally different value. If it had planning permission for warehousing for airport working, the companies there, if they wanted to use it for whatever it was, again, it would have a different valuation. So the value of the land depends on the permitted use. And similarly, in our high streets, we have shops that are sort of charity shops, and that would, if it was zoned as that, then it would have a low valuation. So all land would be valued at its current permitted use, optimum permitted use, what the local community wants it for through our planning processes. Then a valuation would be applied, and then whatever levy that's decided by the government of the day would be levied. And I would argue that the income needs to be split between local government, the government for that area, and national government. So there needs to be a redistribution mechanism in it. So places like Westminster, who don't have a lot of need for social services or public sector housing, because over the years they've booted out poorer people, and they don't have those social needs, and it's a wealthy area where wealthy people live, so their needs in terms of public services is much lower than another area. So there needs to be a mechanism built in and then applied. But of course the pensioners, you know, anyone who's asset rich, income poor, two things really. One, we all have to make a decision today. I don't know, if my income suddenly dropped, do I stay in this house or do I have to move? So we have to make those decisions on a daily basis. A wage earner, they lose their job, they die, their wages are reduced, whatever. So we always have to make those economic decisions in terms of our homes. Do we continue where we are? But there's always, with the land value tax, of course, you can roll it over till the property is sold. So with our system in the UK, you'd pay whatever you were paying under your council tax if you couldn't pay the full, if it was larger, and I would argue it's not going to be bigger for many people. Then there could be a rollover. So when that property changes hands, then the whatever's outstanding would be paid off then. But of course, what you got to, I did it's very difficult to get relevant data when you're trying to work out how much properties, how much land values would be with a land value tax. But I did some rough figures, and I was working out that for most people in the UK, if a council tax was replaced with a land value tax, most people would pay the same. A lot of people would pay less under land value tax, and there'd be a few who would pay more. And in places like Westminster and those very wealthy areas, where you've got homes worth millions of pounds, paying less in council tax than an average home around the rest of the country, which to me is quite immoral, they would pay more, and quite rightly so, because land value, of course, the ownership has not created it. You know, we take it, but you know, if my house goes up in value, I get an unearned income on that, and my asset goes up. But my neighbour next door is a tenant, their rent goes up, and that's not fair when we've contributed equally to generating that land value along with everybody else in the UK. So there's the rollover for asset rich income poor people for whatever reason. And of course, valuation is done on the actual use value, permitted use value.
So would city center sites in rural areas be valued similarly, as Sandra Dotson?
Yes, because any difference would be picked up in the valuation. My house here is worth, I don't know, just over £500,000. If I moved into up north somewhere in a low value area, is probably worth, I don't know, it could be as low as 120,000. So the valuation would be on the land element of that, which would be considerably less. So my land value tax would be much less. So it's this location, wherever you are, the locations vary. And if you're focusing on the land valuations, then you're not going to be paying the same as in a city centre, where you've got all the footfall, you've got good public transport, you've got all the amenities there that add to the land value. Does that answer?
Okay, so there's a long discussions with Scott Baker and Carol Wilcox on the chat. Let's see. I'm trying to find another question. Let me keep scrolling. Anyone who hasn't asked a question yet, could you unmute yourself and ask Heather a question? Because most of what I see now in the chat is conversations rather than questions to Heather. So anyone with a question for Heather, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask her a question.
I have a question. I'm John Lippitz. I noticed, quite surprisingly, that farmland was not included in your approach to LVT. Have I missed a point? Could you please advise?
Yeah, I did say my choice would be to have all land. Well, I have all land held in common, and all land have to pay the full economic rent. But I did include farmland, and I mentioned I'd met with the shadow minister for the environment, Luke Pollard, because of this farming subsidy that goes on currently. Has got to be changed the government's got to change it in a couple of years. And I had a discussion with him about why LVT is actually good for farmland. And I mentioned Duncan Pickard, the farmer up in Scotland, who argues not only should there not be subsidies, but farmers should be paying, farm owners, landowners should be paying land value tax, and obviously replacing bad taxes that distort the economy. Farmers get quite a lot of, and the figures, it was quite interesting because farmers argue that they need the subsidy to survive. And I don't disagree with that when people are farming at the margin, or perhaps the smaller farms or tenant farmers. But actually the way farm incomes are calculated was quite interesting, because if you're a farm owner and you haven't got any mortgage or outstanding, or you're not paying rent, there's an imputed rent that gets deducted from your earnings, and there's other things get deducted from the income of the farm. So therefore you're looking at an artificial low income. The average, I forget the term used, but it was quite interesting looking it up and having that discussion. So yes, I would include farmland very much. And certainly rural communities desperately need a land value tax, where second homes, holiday lets and all the rest of it. And these villages and small places, they stand empty in the winter time. We lived in Cornwall, down the southwest of England, in a fishing village called Mevagissey, which is beautiful, heaving in the summer, but empty in the winter. We'd bought a little shop to work for ourselves, and a few shops we tried, or businesses we tried to keep open, at least for weekends during the winter. But it's the chicken and egg. People don't visit because there's nowhere to go, and there's nowhere to go because we don't have any visitors. So it's that chicken and egg. That area, incidentally, has had the Eden Project with all these big biospheres and rainforests and different planting of different areas of the world. And that has full-time people and as well as seasonal workers. And it's had a big impact on the locality. And in fact, we went down to Mevagissey a couple of years ago, and it wasn't as thriving as in the summertime, but it was certainly businesses were open that were normally shut, and hotels and all the rest of it. And of course, when you're working at that in that way, those seasonal workers have to go on unemployment pay. They're already paid low, and they can't afford to rent in their villages because the house prices have been pushed up so much. And I know in some areas where this has happened and the villages are dying and businesses can't continue there, they're actually stopping people buying second homes. They're holding, I don't know what legislation they're using, but they're able to charge higher council taxes, double council tax rates, and also that homes are only for sale for local people. So that, you know, they desperately need a land value tax.
Can I make a comment, please? Whoever's chairing this.
Yes, go, please.
Okay. Ebenezer Howard in 1904 he worked in the House of Commons, and he used his connections to buy a big piece of land in Letchworth in Hertfordshire in England. And then they were paid 5% of the money they raised, and then they built a garden city. Now that incorporates the idea of land value capture, and so the town's roads and its theatre, cinema, and even a hospital, before we had a National Health Service, was paid for out of this land value capture. And that's one of the garden city principles. And so there's been pressure to build more garden cities because they incorporate the idea of land value capture. Unfortunately, particularly this government has ducked out of it, and there are some new towns proposed. I live next to one of them, which doesn't have land value capture. The 700 homes there will be 10,000 in another 10 or 15 years. But if we had land value capture, when we build new towns, then then that would mean these communities were self-sustaining. If you want to visit Letchworth, it's on the railway line out of London, and there is a museum in the centre of the town, not too far from the railway station. You can go and have a look round and see the principles on which garden cities are built.
Yeah, and land value tax, of course, was one of the pillars of those cities, wasn't it, Ian? And that got lost as discussions went along. And I think the book on that Ebenezer Howard wrote, I might be totally misquoting here, but anyway, land value tax got left out, and it's now been reissued with that back in, because that was one of the bases. And it was, what was it? It was green, using land value tax and public services, but those garden cities, there were the standards that were applied, Ebenezer Howard's ideas. And very much we should be revisiting them, absolutely. But using land value tax as the base for the income and sharing that land wealth. I visited, I'm not sure, it must be in Derbyshire, Melton, is it Melton Mowbray, where they do the pies? And in the centre of that town, there's a whole mass of the land that's still held in common, and it goes back hundreds of years, and it's got a plaque there written about it. And there's all sorts of things like that over the UK. Our City of London, actually, the City of London, the income from the City of London is actually land-based, and that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And they have responsibility for replacing, upkeeping and replacing, I'm not sure how many of the London's bridges. When London Bridge was rebuilt some years back, not a penny of taxpayers' money was used. It was used out of this trust that was set up hundreds of years ago, taking rents, land rents from areas that the City of London owned, not just in the city, but outside as well. And that income was used for rebuilding the bridge and for maintaining the other bridges. So we do have examples of where land wealth is used. We don't shout about them enough. And of course, they're not universal across the country, and it's not built in properly. But we should be looking to our past and those examples, and very much the garden cities. Yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Ian.
Heather, this is Ed Dodson again.
Hello, Ed.
In the United States, in many communities that are experiencing sprawl, one of the strategies to keep open land, and particularly agricultural land, has been for the community to buy the development rights from the landowner. Is that something that's in use in the UK as well?
Sorry, was it to buy what from the landowner? Buy
the development rights. So
right.
That the land a farmer is using can never be used for anything except farm.
Right. What we have here, I assume it's slightly different. You have to have planning permission for developments on farmland. And I can't remember the ratio, how much farmland goes up by. If a field is then gets planning permission for housing, it goes up however many fold worth. And of course, a lot of farmers make a lot of money out of that through that planning consent that releases that land value that they enjoy. But we have planning controls here, and we need tighter planning controls that are much more community-led and proactive rather than reactionary, because too often things are proposed, the council will not approve it for particular reasons, then that's appealed and they win the appeal. And very much if you go to government, the government seems to be letting these developments go through, and it is overdevelopment. So we would have green land zoned as green land. We have the green belts and green areas, but there's always that temptation for local authorities to allow planning permissions to allow developments to go ahead on bits of green land, not just in rural areas, but where I live in West London. It's like every blade of grass is going to be built on, and little pockets of greenery make such a difference, don't they? and a few trees to an area really softens an area, less concrete, etc., as well as for the environmental benefit, place for kids to play, somewhere to go and sit. But we do have planning controls, and I would say we need stronger planning. I'm certainly not a planning expert by any means, but to discourage urban sprawl, you need good zoning and good planning controls. Which sounds similar to what you're talking about, but in a different way.
Okay, this has been great, Heather. We have a few more minutes, everybody, so hang in there with us. I was asked to stop screen sharing, but not being a technical expert on Zoom, I was afraid I would lose the whole next series of slides. I added just maybe 5 more minutes of slides, and then we can continue a little more discussion before we formally
Alana,
close.
yeah,
But in looking at some charts, see if I, yes, Heather, Wendy? Yes.
okay, there have been several questions, and I think this is such an important question. Will LVT provide enough funding for governments to function? And of course, I feel very strongly that it will, but I would be interested in Heather's response, because I think this is a very important question, and it's a comment that I often get, that land values just will not provide enough income for governments to function. And I know that this is not the case, of course.
This is a common argument, and it's very difficult to argue against, certainly here, because we don't have enough data to prove the point. And of course, you know, it comes back to this thing of land value and taxation being inversely related. And if you go back to the law of rent with the 3 factors of production, taxes, other people can argue this better, taxes actually come out of, they're part of land value, and that's why they're inversely related. If you reduce taxes, you'll increase land values, because that surplus income will increase. And similarly, if you reduce taxes, land values will go up, and so you're replacing what you currently get in taxation, but you'll get more, or you could lower the rate depending on the government of the day. If they wanted the same income level, then people would benefit by having lower land value tax than they currently pay in their other taxes. So they'd replace but benefit. And there's all those environmental benefits as well to remember, and how do you put a price on them? Certainly there'd be enough for governments of the day. When you look at places like Hong Kong, when they built their new metro system however many years ago, they didn't go to taxpayers, they used land value. They levied a land value tax on the land value, and that paid for their metro system. So it is this relationship with land value and taxation. And if you reduce taxes, land values will go up, and vice versa. And that really is the root of that. You have to remember that. And of course, as land value tax comes in, and those currently unused, underused commercial buildings, they'll be brought into use. And then that will add to the local benefit, you know, the local economy, and land values will increase. So you can have it will change, it will fundamentally change how an economy currently works, to the benefit of all. And make
Heather,
use
would
land
you be
efficiently.
for basic income, some percent out of the land rent?
I would. Again, as another discussion we have in our Labour Land campaign periodically, I certainly would, and I liken it to the Alaska oil fund revenue that everyone gets. And I think 2 things. One, I think a basic income paid for out of land value tax would be good in itself, because it would raise people's incomes and minimum income. Everyone's entitled to a decent home, decent income, you know, and a decent environment. But also, I think it would keep that policy in place. And I know that I've read where politicians at time of elections have said, oh, we'll get rid of the land value, the oil revenue. I forget what you call it, the oil revenue benefit thing that you get from the oil income. We'll get rid of it. And people have objected to it because, of course, that's become part of their income, their expectation, and they're sharing in that natural resource wealth, which to me is right. And we should be using that right across our natural resources. We should be using that natural resource wealth to share it with everybody. And I would favor a basic income out of land wealth.
Thank you. So we had kind of missed that last other slide that you had, but it's been up on the screen for a while. If I think we've covered.
Oh,
those
that's
points.
just my summary of what it actually, how we would all benefit. Yeah.
Right. Good summary.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then that was another summry.
Yeah,
Want to read that?
I think that final sentence, land value tax would underpin the good policies that are needed for a fair and green economy. When policies are talked about, or will have, and it's often in terms of subsidies, but if we're going to build more public transport that's good and cheap and affordable and accessible all over the UK, that immediately impacts on land values. And we've seen that very much we see it very much in London with the Crossrail, surface rail, and with our underground system. Every time there's an improvement, it affects land values, increases them. So if you're going to do all those good things, you really need a land value tax to underpin those economic effects that they have, that these good policies have on land values. So that's returned then to in maintaining our public services and improving them.
Sometimes, rather than the violent phrase of killing two birds with one stone, I like to refer to all these benefits other as hatching several birds out of one egg.
That sounds nice. I like that.
So I think we've made a strong point, Heather, about the importance of land and not looking at and seeing that it's all connected down to the earth. This is just a simple graphic. House values rise to say that no, when they say, the economists say house values rise, we know that it's the land value rising. A house is a car, it deteriorates over time. It's always land values are rising. This is a problem of the fact that we made land a subset of capital in neoliberal economics, not a separate factor. Now that Kamala Harris, the new vice president, she's now of the United States, she's relocated to Washington, decided to let go of her San Francisco apartment. She bought the home in 2004 for $489,000, but recently put it on the market for almost $800,000. So again, just another example of how rapidly there's a doubling of her apartment, rather modest, I think, apartment value. And we don't see anything like that happening to wages. This is a US statistic. It's just a little graph, shows land value as a percent of home value. And again, that boom bust cycle is very much a land value boom. It drives up as far as the speculators can take it, and then we have a bust. But at the high mark there, that was 2005, that would have been going towards then the crash. 40% of a house cost is the land value. So this really rough ride of housing costs that never really go low enough for the average person to afford anymore. So we're just going to reflect on some slides about this needless, horrific suffering of homelessness in our societies. And just imagine being these people, if they're your parents or your uncle or aunt or your children, just the human suffering, the needless human suffering because of this thoroughly corrupted economic systems that we're living under. We all need help sometimes. Just the sadness, the depression All he has is his dog, basically. Thank goodness he has a little dog, but how sad. He puts a blanket on his dog. Parents and children, homeless and hungry. These are all scenes that we're all seeing in our cities now.
Yeah.
It's an absolute, there's a phrase, moral injury, that I think all of us on this phone call, all of us on this Zoom call would feel a moral injury. We feel deeply injured and offended to have to see our fellow humanity, our one human family, part of our family, living in such conditions. This a little child being so depressed. He has a little toy, but no child, nobody should be suffering. And this is needless. So we need to, I implore all of us to step up, to be active, to speak. We need to move these movements along for our land rights and for land value tax. We absolutely must solve this problem. This is a tent city in California. California, the 8th, if it was a separate nation, it would have the 8th largest economy. And yet the wealth inequality is grown so horrifically. I think it's 40% of the homeless in the United States live in California. Well, the weather's warm. You can survive the winter better in a tent in California. But I've seen videos of people bicycling around streets of tents, on and on and on. The tent cities growing massively. And this used to be the kind of thing we would see in third world countries. It's coming to us. It's for us to solve here, and that will help the poverty worldwide. We approach it and address it right where we're living. This should not be. Now here, I just had to put this in. I came across it yesterday. San Francisco pays $61,000 a year for one tent site, in a site to shelter the homeless. Why? So here you have an underutilized vacant lot in the center of one of the most expensive cities on the planet. So here you have massive land hoarding, poor land use, land speculative site, and that landowner is being paid by tax dollars $61,000 a year for one tent, for rental space for one tent. It's absurd. So isn't it just horrific? I mean, it's so ridiculous that a city government would even come up with this as a solution. I can't believe it. But they're trying to be humanitarian for the homeless. They're trying to do social distancing here for these tents. They're trying to have porta potties for them and some kind of, see those little facilities, a shower center. And they have a place to put free food on tables, or maybe to do a little cooking. That is our humanitarian aid to our homeless. So here's a motto. I mean, we're all working for land value tax. We're presenting, and I think many of us on this call are strong on the land value tax. And meanwhile, what do we do about these horrific homelessness problems? Can we take direct action to expand the access for land for the homeless? And please take down that website, squareonevillages.org. This is in Oregon. This is a beautiful initiative. These are tiny homes that some of the homeless, these are very low income people that were homeless and living in their cars. They were homeless in their cars or doubling up with other people. So I don't know, that crashed out. So I'll try to get the slide up. I don't know what happened. So Emerald Village and these villages, the formerly homeless people, actually some of them are paying $200 or $300, but that makes them stable. It makes them viable. They have a safe place to sleep. They have a place to shower and cook. And you can go and look at the videos, and these people are so happy and so thankful that they have these tiny houses that in some cases they've helped build in these communities. So we can, I'll go try to get back to the end slide, which is basically a thank you very much to Heather for this really great presentation. And then for Wendy to then kind of close us off for this program. Thank you. And I'm going to, at that point, stop the recording. But, if people want to stay on longer, if you have more discussion with Wendy, then we can stay on longer. But Wendy, can you just, I mean, with Heather, further discussion with Heather. Wendy, can you just close us down and may need to get unmuted.
Yes, I just want to thank all of our participants and
Yeah.
Alana for managing the technology, and Heather for a great presentation. And
you.
please go to our website and sign up for future talks. It's great.
The
and
website is easy, theiu.org.
Appreciate the comments and the questions, and there's plenty of subjects there for further discussions.
Can I just say a thank you? Obviously, thank you to Alana and Wendy for organising this, but thank you for people taking part in the comments that we've heard. It's really encouraging that all around the world, we identify the problems and we identify the solutions. I mean, seeing that tent city was horrible. It's inhuman, but we also need other social policies. People get hooked onto drugs and unemployment and all those social problems. And land value tax would give an income for all the services that we need as a society to benefit from. That picture, the Emerald Village, reminds me of after the Second World War, where after so much bomb damage, we used to have prefabs in the UK. And the first home I was born into was a prefab in London. And they're actually quite valued now, the few that are left. They're quite a sort of collectible thing, part of our history.
Thank you, everyone. Stopping the recording now.
Thank you.
Bye.